And so, look, when someone stands up and says there's something wrong, the first thing you should ask is, why should I assume that you know what the hell you're talking about? That's a good question. Well, you investigate it and you find out whether or not the person does know what they're talking about. And on the issue that I'm describing to you tonight, as far as I can tell, I know what I'm talking about. Now, people have been on my case about this in a very serious way for quite a long time. And so far they haven't made any inroads into my arguments, and most of the time they're too damn cowardly to debate me, which is also something that's really interesting, because I put out public calls constantly. It's you want to debate about gender and sex, you just bring it on, because that actually happens to be an area of expertise for me, and I know the damn literature. And if you want to come out and make your case that all the differences between men and women are socially constructed, culturally constructed, or that they're just a personal whim, which by the way is exactly what's written into the policies surrounding Bill C-16, then you come out and make that case publicly and see how well it stands up. And I know how well it'll stand up, because that kind of thinking was defeated in the scientific realm back in the 1960s in the universities. And what that meant was that the radicals who wanted to keep promoting precisely that kind of view just circumvented the entire scientific process and started to implement their demands for their particular viewpoint from a practical, policy, administrative, and legislative perspective, knowing full well that they had lost 100% on the empirical and the scientific front. And now what they do instead is criticize the scientific endeavor itself because it failed to produce the results that they assumed would be the case. So there's plenty that's rotten in the state of Denmark, and I'm embarrassed to state that a tremendous amount of that stems from the universities, and they're in bad shape. Do not send your children to the humanities, right? They're corrupt. They will... They won't learn to think because the postmodernists don't believe in thinking. They won't learn logic because the postmodernists believe that logic is one of the tools that the oppressive patriarchy uses to sustain its oppressive patriarchy, oppressive patriarchal nature. They won't learn to write. Well, that's because teaching people to write takes a tremendous amount of effort, and perhaps they're not so much interested in teaching people to formulate their own thoughts precisely and carefully as they are interested in producing cult-like clones to go out and do their activist work, which is precisely what they state on their websites. So, you know, things are not so pretty, and it's very embarrassing as a member of the Academy and to come before a group of public citizens and say, you've been betrayed by your institutions of higher learning. It's sad, and it's not good. And you know, you think, well, it's just a university, it's just an ivory tower. It's like, think again, man. What happens in the universities happens everywhere 5 years later. So it's no mere ivory tower issue. So, okay, so a couple of months ago, I did this lecture in Vancouver called A Left-Wing Case for Free Speech, because you can actually make a left-wing case for free speech pretty easily, right? It's like, obviously some people have more influence and authority than others, and just as obviously it's harder for the people with less influence and authority to make their case known, so clearly they need to be able to make their case. So that's the left-wing case for free speech. It's fairly straightforward. I thought it needed to be made because, especially on the radical left, people seem to have forgotten that free speech was actually their most, welcome friend, and enabled them to do whatever good things they did manage to do over the last 100 years, but I made a left-wing case, and so that was easy and reasonably entertaining, and you can watch that on YouTube if you want. And so tonight what I thought I'd do, as a counterpart to that, is lay out what I believe might be some tenets for a viable 21st century conservatism. And these are ideas that I'm playing with, so I wrote down about 12 of them. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but we can start with a few. And this is what the conservatives could be selling to the public. Now, what seems to me to be happening instead at the moment is, as Kathleen Wynne flames out, not nearly fast enough in my opinion, the attitude among conservatives at the provincial party seems to be something, well, let's just let's go cluster in a corner and not do anything too stupid, because maybe she'll burn herself out so badly that we'll just win the next election and we won't have to, you know, do anything that will put us at risk. And I'm not being cynical about that. I can understand the utility of that policy, although I think it's a bad policy. And I think it's a bad policy because there are some things that seriously need to be said about Kathleen Wynne and her government. And I can tell you one noble aim for the provincial Conservatives for the next election would be to decimate the provincial Liberals. Not one should be left. What's her popularity at right now? Under 10%? If she had a shred of integrity, she would have already resigned. So, anyways, there's a goal for the Conservatives. No Liberals sitting after the 2018 election. That would send a message to the social justice warrior types. It would also send a message to the centrists who should actually be occupying the positions of power in the Liberal Party, that if you allow yourself to be taken over by a radical fringe, you're going to get decimated at the polls. So, you know, that might be an exciting message to sell young people. Get out there, knock on some doors. See if you can take the social justice warriors out at the top before they do more damage than they've already done. She's got another year to do plenty of damage, and you can be sure that she's going to do plenty more damage in that year. So, okay, what else? Here's some things you might think about if you're a conservative. These things have become, what would you say? People are afraid to say them. Here's the first one. The fundamental assumptions of Western civilization are valid. How about that? You know, it's not... You think it's an accident? Oh, here's how you find out, okay? Which countries do people want to move away from? Hey, not ours. Which countries do people want to move to? Ours. Guess what? They work better. And it's not because we went around the world stealing everything we could get our hands on. It's because we got certain fundamental assumptions right. Thank God for that. After thousands and thousands of years of trying. And because of that, we've managed to establish a set of civilizations that are shining lights in the world. You know, now, you can be pretty damn filthy and still be a shining light in this world, right? Because if you look around the world at the state of governance in most places, it's like the most pathological, corrupt, and vicious thugs rule. And to stand out as an illuminated light against that background isn't so difficult. But nonetheless, you know, we're as good as it's got. And unless we can come up with something better, we should be very careful about messing around with that. So why don't we start with the assumption that we're doing something right? One of the things we're doing right, for example, is that we actually value the individual, right? The individual has intrinsic value in Western societies. Do you know how long it took people to formulate that as an idea? And how unlikely that idea is that poor you, you know, useless, powerless you, with all your damn faults, you're actually worth something. You're worth something to the point that the law has to respect you. God, we don't want to abandon that for some half-witted collectivism, which we're doing as rapidly as possible, because one of the things that characterizes the radical left types is they don't give a damn about you as an individual or about individuals at all. You're black or you're white or you're Latino or you're transsexual or you're homosexual or whatever. You're a group. You're a member of a group. And the only thing that matters is the group. Well, I can tell you, if the only thing that matters is the group, you bloody well don't matter very much. And then you got to ask yourself just exactly what sort of people are trying to set things up so it is that the individual doesn't matter very much. Well, it's the sort of people to whom the individual doesn't matter very much. And I might suggest that you don't elect them, and that when they attempt to take power, that you do everything you can to stop them. Okay, so that's assumption number one. Assumption number two, peaceful social being is preferable to isolation and to war. In consequence, it justly and rightly demands some sacrifice of individual impulse and idiosyncrasy. Okay, so you want to live alone in the bush? You're going to starve to death and be eaten by black flies. It's not a good solution. Okay, so you have to cooperate with other people, and that means you can't get to be your whimsical self 100% of the time. It means that most of you has to be sacrificed so that you can be approximately like everyone else. Now, that's a real sacrifice, right? It's a sacrifice of it might even be a sacrifice of some of the unique qualities that everyone needs from you. Socialization costs, but the advantage of it is, well, we get to exist. Look, we can all sit together in this hall and no one has their hands around each other's throats. And we're talking about serious things. Okay, man, that's worth something. And what it's worth in part is you don't get to be whatever spectacularly colored creature you want to be all the time. You have to do what you can to be normal and predictable. And it's not like normal and predictable is the highest virtue, because it's not. And being more than normal and being unique and creative and contributing in that way is extraordinarily important. But the fundamental point is that social being requires the sacrifice of a certain amount of individual idiosyncrasy, and that's a fundamentally conservative claim. It's like you should do what everyone else does unless you have a really good reason to vary. It's a good rule. It's like you do what people have done throughout time. You grow up, you find a partner, you establish a stable relationship, you get a job, you make yourself useful, you have some children, you do something productive and interesting with your spare time, and you try to act like a respectable human being. That's what you do. That's a conservative ethos. And if you have something spectacular about you that needs to be revealed to the world, then break some rules, man. Go right ahead. I'm dead serious about that. But most of the time you don't. And even if you happen to be a special person, and you might be, 90% of you still isn't special. So most of the time you're still going to be following the rules. And the rules aren't there to oppress. They're there to keep us away from each other's throats, because human beings are very warlike, and we're very competitive, and we're very aggressive. And if we are fortunate enough to have woven together a social fabric that basically renders us peaceful and cooperative, we should try disrupting that at our great peril, because the general rule for human existence throughout the centuries has been turmoil and war, and we don't have that here. And so thank God for that, and it's worth a bit of a sacrifice.